What's up, y'all? This is Zach with Living Corporate. And you know what we're doing every single week. We are centering and amplifying Black and brown voices at work. And how do we do that? We're having authentic conversations with all types of people. As you may or may not know, our tagline is real talk in a corporate world, right? So what does that mean? That means we're having the discussions that you may have over drinks with someone after work or, over a coffee before work. We're having those conversations out loud. I know for me, as a first generation Black professional, I really valued when people who looked like me pulled me aside and gave me that real. And so our goal is to really democratize information and flatten access to everybody by creating content that does that. I'm giving all this intro because of the group and the people that I'm interviewing today. And I anticipate that there are going to be folks who've listened to Living Corporate who've never listened to Living Corporate before. You want to kind of level set from time to time. And this interview is pretty unique. We actually have Dr. Katrice Albert, Executive Vice President of Culture, Innovation, and Inclusion at S2A Solutions, and Eric Severson, EVP and Chief People Officer at Neiman Marcus Group. Welcome to the show. How are y'all doing?
Great,
Good morning,
Zach.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's an honor. This is a unique interview. And I think what I want to do is give each of you space to introduce yourselves a little bit and the dynamic of how Neiman Marcus and Third Eye Consulting are working together and just like the context of even like this conversation.
Katrice, why don't you start?
Sure. Thank you so much, Eric. So I'm Katrice Albert, as Zach introduced, and I am a principal and managing member of Third Eye Consulting Group. I have 25 years of executive higher education leadership, especially in the areas of diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. Associated with that is how do we really help professionals thrive in their corporate setting, in higher education, and how do we do this in a way where people understand that we've got to be able to bring diverse top talent together in order to reach all of the business and higher education needs that leaders are expecting.
And I'm Eric Severson. I'm the Chief People and Belonging Officer, as you noted, Zach, of Neiman Marcus Group. And I've been doing this work for close to 30 years. And we're excited to be partnering with Katrice and Third Eye Group as part of our overall journey towards creating a workplace of belonging. And our purpose in doing that is really severalfold. One, it's the right thing to do, to have a workplace where everyone, regardless of background, feels like they have the ability and the potential and the opportunity and the equity to reach their full potential. But secondly, it's about competitive advantage, that people everywhere want to work somewhere where they have the same opportunity as everyone else, where there's equity and the ability to achieve their dreams. And ultimately, we want to be the employer of choice and the workplace of choice within the luxury retail space.
That's incredible. I find it curious. I don't talk to, I'm going to be a little tacky. I'm going to name drop some people. So, we've had the CEO of SurveyMonkey on. We've had the CEO of Great Place to Work on. We've had different executives on Living Corporate. I don't know how many chief people officers we've had. And so let me ask you this, Eric, as we talk about Neiman Marcus and the decision to work with Third Eye, why now, right? What were the actions and intentions around this space prior to George Floyd's murder? And what was it about? And again, I'm kind of making a presumption that things shifted and changed because it seemed to be kind of a pattern across the corporate space, that George Floyd's murder, compounded by Black Lives Matter protests, compounded by some of the actions of the president, those things kind of came together to create this momentum and pressure to do something different and new. I'm curious to understand more about how if at all, that impacted Neiman Marcus's decision and what was going on at Neiman Marcus before this moment.
Yeah, great question, Zach, because it did. I would just start in the place, though, of saying that our intention before those actions of this summer was to create a diversity and belonging strategy that would do what I mentioned earlier. And this is something that in each employer I've worked with, we've endeavored to do, which is to create a competitive advantage through diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. In other words, to differentiate ourselves and set ourselves apart from our competitors by being a place where everyone has equity and equal opportunity. So we had decided in the spring, as an outcome of our people strategy work, to put together a multi-year diversity and belonging strategy. That was a few months before George Floyd's murder. That incident and the events that followed really accelerated and catalyzed our work. It caused us to say, this is something that we were planning to address, but we need to accelerate that work, and we need to put a special emphasis on racial equity. And that's where we decided to partner with Katrice and Third Eye Group, who are experts in that space, to really help us jump on this and accelerate the work we were doing and accentuate it. And we're happy to talk to you about some of the things that we're going to be doing in partnership with Dr. Albert, because I think we're pretty excited and proud of the agenda we have ahead of us.
Eric, I'm really excited to get there and talk about, the planning and how you all are moving forward. I think what I also want to understand, kind of, again, just from a foundation setting perspective, Dr. Albert, the folks I talk to in the DEI space, they have all types of clients that they don't actually take on if they're privileged enough economically that they can, turn work away. I'm curious. I would imagine that, you don't say yes to everybody. And so I'm curious as to what was it about Neiman Marcus Group that encouraged you to take them on and work with them as a partner here?
Yeah, Zach. So you're absolutely right. I've been 30 years in the game, and I know frauds and can smell them out a mile away, right? Those sort of folks who are smoke and mirrors, that they want to be able to, have a DE&I expert, subject matter expert, to come in and to check the box. And what I, felt during the entire request for proposal time and the connections with Eric and with his senior leaders, it was a few things. The first is that they had already, launched into understanding their associates' feelings of belonging, their associates' ways of thinking about how to make Neiman Marcus a better connected, a better engaged organization. And from the leadership down, that it was a corporation being transformed and transfixed on the mission of love, right? The mission of love. So I study bell hooks. I study, womanist theory. And, bell hooks talks about, our commitment, especially among Blacks and brown people, that we've got to be invested in, loving ourselves and loving each other and falling in love with each other over and over and over and over again, especially, how difficult times are with, issues of racism, issues of otherness in the workplace, and, coming to a reckoning on anti-Black hatred. And so taking the partnership and wanting to be linked arm in arm with Neiman Marcus was because I could tell from a top-down leadership approach that, issues of belonging and issues of engagement, both internally in the organization and for their clients and customers, was just, with a foundation of love and a commitment to one another.
That's a beautiful thing. And it's encouraging to hear. I think about this space, and I'm, again, so Eric, I got a couple more questions. I'm not picking on you, I promise. Maybe I am picking on you, because this is a platform we're talking about. It's about centering and amplifying Black and brown folks at work. Help me understand something. There continues to be this increased pressure and challenge from folks across the board, Black and white, brown, who challenge white men, white folks in general, being in these very senior positions around equity and inclusion and diversity. I'm curious, I'm certain that you hear those critiques, and how do you receive that? what is your position on like the role that white folks should be playing in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion? And what advice would you give to other white professionals or white folks seeking to work in this space?
Yeah, I love that question, Zach. And I have had it asked of me many times in the past, going back to my first full-time job in this space when I was head of diversity and inclusion at Gap Inc. back in 2004, 2005. And here's my thinking about it. I think, first of all, the fact of the matter is that anyone who self-identifies as a minority in any way in this country, whether that individual identifies as Black, as LGBT, as a person with a disability, whatever it is, recognizes that by definition, by being in the minority of the power structure of the country, of your company or whatever organization, you're always going to need the support and allyship of those in the majority to get full justice and equity. That's just it's a fact. And so what I say to people is we need to figure out how to get people who are in positions of power, who make the rules in organizations, right? And practically every entity of power in the United States, whether it's the US Congress, whether it's a corporation like Neiman Marcus, or whether it's a nonprofit organization, the people at the top of the organization are the ones who make the rules. They're the ones who decide who gets hired, who doesn't get hired, who gets promoted, how much they get paid, what the culture is like. So it's imperative for people who are part of the majority that controls the power of organizations to be involved actively in disrupting the structure of structural inequity, whether it's structural racism, structural homophobia, etc., because those things are implicit in the structures and they have to be deconstructed. So, when someone asks, well, why do you think that you should be engaged in this work? And like, why did we add belonging to my title, Chief People and Belonging Officer? Because I want to be held accountable for creating an environment at Neiman Marcus where every single individual, regardless of how she or they identify, can belong there and therefore has an environment of equity where they can reach their full potential. Like, that's my responsibility. I want to hold myself accountable and I want to hold Neiman Marcus accountable. And that's why also at Neiman Marcus and at DaVita, my previous corporation where I was Chief People Officer, and at Gap Inc. before that, our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy is not about happy talk and just feel good training, etc. It's about systematically, year over year, implementing components in our infrastructure that ensure that there's equity across the board. It's implementing what I would call evidence-based bias interrupters throughout all of our operating processes, whether that's hiring, whether that's talent management and promotion, whether that's the infrastructure of interacting with customers, things that ensure that in a system of structural inequity, which is what we have in the United States, that we've implemented the right practices to make sure that everyone has equal opportunity and equal access to get ahead and get to where they need to be and to be comfortable and happy in our workplace. So that's things like in the talent space, implementing diverse candidate slates requirements, what's outside of corporate world known as the Rooney Rule, or requirements for diverse hiring panels or diverse sourcing, et cetera, as well as having objectives and goals around diversifying leadership over time to hold ourselves accountable for making progress. It's real, operational, tangible, concrete steps that change the system. And that's what I'm all about. And I think that as an experienced business person, part of where I can add value is to open the door to making those structural operating changes happen so that we get the results and outcomes around diversity, equity, and inclusion that we want. Because at the end of the day, the point of all of this is that everyone has both equal opportunity and equal access to the success factors that allow people to thrive at work.
So Zach, so this is part of the reason why, I did not hesitate to work directly with Neiman Marcus, because here it is, a white male executive being two things. Number one, a waymaker, right? Making ways for all to be able to thrive and succeed, in the organizational structure, because of dismantling systems that have historically excluded, many types of people, mainly Black and brown people. And number two, being highly culturally intelligent. And so that's where we want, the white power structure, as Eric talked about, those that hold the power in organizations to, number one, grow their cultural intelligence, where they are focused on minimizing their microaggressions that they have in the workplace every day, understanding their unconscious bias, understanding the attitudes and beliefs that they have about others, but then also building the knowledge and the skill set necessary to change the structure so that everybody belongs. So we need everyone in this space doing the smart thing, right? We get nowhere alone. So of course we need whites in corporate America to take on the responsibility of having high levels of cultural intelligence and disrupting these structural experiences that continue to exclude Blacks and Browns from, achieving the success that they rightfully should have in corporate America.
No, absolutely. And I was going to say, a few things that Eric, that you mentioned, and we're going to get back to 100%, Dr. Albert, your points. I want to address things like in order. So Eric, use a lot of words there that frankly, I just don't hear a lot of other white D&I leaders using in these spaces, which are accountability, systems, power, even belonging, data, evidence-based, deconstruct, right? And 100%, Dr. Albert, to your point, it speaks to the level of awareness and intelligence that is needed in this work. I think that I was just having this conversation offline with someone else, is that the way that America by and large is willfully obtuse on matters of race is in itself racist, right? We don't take certain things because we don't take it serious. But you don't take things serious that you don't value. As an example, I'm not a big Dungeons and Dragons person, so I can't tell you the value count of a dragon if you rolled a 5 on a 6-sided die. I don't know. I don't care. That doesn't mean anything to me. And as a result, I'm going to be really, really behind the 8 ball as it pertains to that realm, that space. The sad part is that a lot of folks treat Black equity like Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's this thing that isn't really real, but whatever. And if you really are enthusiast about it, then, go ahead, I guess, but who cares? And I think that's right. I think it's 100% right that we need to, one, hold ourselves to a higher point of accountability, to actually be smart about these things, just like you'd be smart about your soft line sales or the planogram and the strategy behind laying it out, and the shopping pattern of your Saturday customers. You need to have the same level of intentionality and intellectual rigor around your employees and lived experience and how those things tie into burnout. But the point is that there needs to be mirrored effort, intellectual and emotional effort, to understand, to interrogate, and to engage. And if we're not doing that, then we're not operating at the top of our respective licenses within the organizations that we work. I'm curious, Eric, we're going to get to the things that you're doing, that Neiman Marcus, is doing in a moment. I'm curious, as the work, Dr. Albert, as y'all been working together and you've come on as a consultative partner for the Neiman Marcus Group, what are some of the biggest, again, I recognize this is a public podcast. I'm not asking for you to air nobody out, but just if you were to kind of give themes, what are some of the themes that, you feel like you've identified in terms of kind of where Neiman Marcus and opportunities y'all have recognized to really expand and grow upon?
So we're early in the infancy stages of the relationship, and it's really exciting that they've done some of the work already, doing some focus groups around the things that associates are thinking and feeling, and, launching a major all associates survey, right? Because as Eric talked about, we want to have the baseline data to be able to know exactly how to make the move so that the associates can see that their voices are being heard. I really think it's important to also appreciate and recognize that I'll be working directly with the senior leadership and then all the leaders cascading down with levels of cultural intelligence and a team dynamics experience, so that the leadership all across the U.S. are able to, really hold others accountable in the entire organization. And so this sort of 5-part series will really tackle issues related to fearless and brave conversations. How do you understand microaggressions in the workplace and help to mitigate those unconscious biases? How do you really think through a plan of action such that hiring patterns are realized so that everyone has an equitable opportunity to not only be attracted and recruited to Neiman Marcus, but to be hired and then to be, supported and succession planned to higher levels in the organization. And then really a call to courage for everyone, right? So Eric talked about this sense of belonging, being woven through the entire organization of Neiman Marcus. And, we utilize, this HR guru, Dave Ulrich, who is really known for how do you really do this work well? And it means that you have to have a focus on, internal engagement in real time and in real ways, and invest, for the long haul in internal engagement. You have to do that externally too. So with your external, partners and customers, because that shapes the culture that you want, and it leads to the transformational change that you expect. And so, I think that Eric and his colleagues understand that this is long haul work, right? I always say exclusion didn't start yesterday, so inclusive excellence won't happen tomorrow. It's put your one foot in front of the other every day. And so I think that, in this infancy of the relationship, we're seeing that, all voices that are a part of Neiman Marcus really matter, from the earlier focus groups now to the, large scale associate wide survey, and then a commitment to growing, not only emotional intelligence, but the competencies, the leadership competencies around cultural intelligence as well.
And, to that point around it being a journey, Eric, can we talk a little bit about the things that Neiman Marcus is mobilizing that you're really excited about in the spirit of dismantling or engaging the systems as they are today and re-engaging them in the name of racial equity?
Sure. Well, Zach, part of doing that involves, as Dr. Albert said, taking the long view. So we're implementing a 3-year strategy, and it has 3 distinct pillars. The first is workforce, the second is workplace, and the third is marketplace. And the idea behind the pillars is that if you want to create an organization of diversity, equity, inclusion, and ultimately belonging, you have to address all dimensions of your ecosystem that affect people. So I've talked a lot already about the workplace, but the workplace at Neiman Marcus is also a marketplace in which customers, brands, suppliers all interact, as well as members of the community who may not be any of those. So the workforce dimension is about talent fundamentally. So it's about the parts of our business that affect attracting, retaining, and developing people. So the bias interrupters, if you will, that we're implementing in that pillar of our strategy have to do with putting in place those evidence-based practices that ensure that when we're sourcing talent to work at Neiman Marcus, that we're casting the net wide and equitably. So it's about changing our sourcing strategies to ensure that we are sourcing qualified talent from many diverse talent pools, so that when you're actually then making the talent selection decisions, you're making those from a broad, diverse, qualified pool of candidates. Then also implementing evidence-based practices in selection and development of talent to ensure that bias doesn't come into play and that there's equity for all qualified candidates for roles. So that involves things like I talked about earlier, implementing a practice requiring diverse candidate slates for key roles, or diverse hiring panels where you ensure that the people who are making the hiring decisions are representative of the diversity of the workforce. And then ultimately in processes like succession management, like talent reviews, that you have bias interrupters there as well. So that includes, for example, having a lens when you're reviewing talent to ensure that you are including talent of color, talent of all abilities, LGBTQ talent, etc. And that's just that's in the workforce bucket. And that's what people usually think about when they think about D&I. The second pillar is workplace. And that's about the actual work environment for employees. That includes all of the things that affect whether someone feels like she or he or they are included. So that's how you communicate with people. And is that equitable? Is it inclusive? Does it look like and feel like all of your associates? It includes how you train people. And in all of these pillars, the approach that we're taking, which is the one that we took at Gap and at DaVita, is not to create a proliferation of new DEI programs, but rather to integrate into your core operating practices, whether that's hiring or training or serving customers, inclusive practices that ensure that everyone is included and treated equitably and equally, whether they're an associate, a customer, a brand, or a supplier. And that's a breakthrough idea, because a lot of people think of DEI as a lot of new programs that are just about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with those things. But the problem is that it's basic operating practices in a company or organization, like hiring, serving, ringing people up, buying things that affect the day-to-day life experience of the people in that system more than anything else you do. You can train your associates, 100 hours a year. And if you don't change the way that you hire people, if you don't ensure that there are practices in place to ensure that customers are treated equitably and equally, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change the material life of the people in the system. And then the marketplace dimension is about non-employees. This is about the other people in the ecosystem and what we have to change about the interactions with those people. So for example, what's included in that for Neiman Marcus is our marketing practices, how we market, what the casting looks like for the models who appear in our marketing, whom we're marketing to, through what vehicles. It includes customer interactions in stores and online. So what practices we have to ensure that every customer has the same high touch, exceptional experience, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, etc. So the objective of this strategy then is that over the next 3 years, we will make marked and quantifiable improvements on key metrics. So all of these, I mentioned practices. Well, how do you know if they're getting anywhere? Well, you have to identify key metrics to measure in each one of those 3 dimensions of workforce, workplace, and marketplace to be able to track whether you're making a difference. So for example, in the workforce dimension, that means, for instance, identifying targets in leadership diversity, for example, that that we can track ourselves against. So if in today's world, perhaps the percent of African American leaders in the organization is 6%, and we look out at the peer group for ourselves and see that it's at 10%, then we want to at least first get to 10% and be at that place. If that makes sense. And you do that through the evidence-based practices of making sure that the pool of qualified candidates from which we're drawing leaders and developing leaders represents the diversity of our workforce. So that we make those selections, they're equitable selections, and everyone has both equal opportunity and equal access to those promotion opportunities.
My goodness gracious. Now, look, I don't typically, we have a soundboard, right? So, we try to kind of keep everything kind of light because we don't want everything to be too heavy and boring. I don't know if you listen to Living Corporate, you'll hear that, we'll have a little background music on in the background. But I got to drop this right here because you're over here just going crazy. That's a flex bomb. So here's a little just cultural education. Eric, I don't know if you listened to New York radio in the 2000s, but there was a DJ. His name is Funk Master Flex, right? And every now and then, he'll say something really crazy, or he'll be, he drops some bars, then he drops the flex bomb. So that was that's a flex bomb. Okay, that's something to add emphasis. Okay, no, but absolutely, I'm right there with you. I think it's incredible that not only that you outlined, things that you're doing, but then gave some practical examples, because a lot of folks, they listen to Living Corporate, or they just engage in the space and they're trying to figure out just what to do. A lot of folks, they're ignorant to what to do, and they want to do something, they just don't know what those things are. Let's continue forward. I recognize that Neiman Marcus Group is working with a variety of different partners and vendors, of course, including Dr. Albert and Third Eye. I'm curious, Eric, are there any other groups, partners that you're working with to help as y'all continue in this journey?
Yeah, so we're also partnering with Canaries. It's a fascinating organization, Black-owned and founded organization that is a combination of a tech company. So it's a data company that focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And their sweet spot, which is a perfect complement to Dr. Albert, is that they help organizations measure progress. So it's the Canaries survey that we are leveraging this fall to assess our organizational need. So we've already built a strategy, which I described, which is based on all of our years of experience with what it takes in any company in order to make progress. So there are certain things you don't have to survey people to know that you need to ensure, like equal employment opportunity and equity. Then though, if you're doing this work the right way, you need to understand the lived experience of your associates. And Canaries is the best of the market, in my opinion, at leveraging big data analytics in order to help companies in a very complex and sophisticated way understand the experience of your associates across a whole bunch of intersectional dimensions. So not just to try to understand monolithically what is the experience of a Black associate in your organization, because of course there isn't one. There are many, right. The woman's experience, but it allows associates to talk about their experience interdimensionally through the sophistication of the survey tool. So we're going to take that data, and it's going to help us build out and further refine our strategy so that we can figure out what do our associates want us to focus on first, second, or third as the most impactful parts of their experience. So I think that it's the combination of what they're going to bring to us in terms of measuring, quantifying, and holding ourselves accountable. And then what Dr. Albert's bringing to us in terms of capability building, because Dr. Albert and I are really kindred spirits, is that in addition to measuring and quantifying in a very operational way system changes, you have to bring about capability building. So diversity, equity, inclusion isn't about conferring facts on people about other groups. which is how some of this work has been done in the past. It's about building people's, and especially leaders' capability in cultural competency, in inquiry, in using evidence-based techniques in order to connect with other people and understand other people and have conversations with other people. That's all that ever changes people's connection with one another ever. And so it's this great combination of the data and the capabilities that's really supporting us in our journey. And our job is to do the work of putting in place these practices, changing the system, and continuing to grow as leaders and as people. And it's a journey that's never over. To be culturally competent, you have to work on this till the day you die.
So Dr. Albert, I'm curious to get your perspective on a couple of things. One, what advice would you have for executive leadership groups who are doing the work, who are trying to take on the journey, and you made a mention earlier that it takes time, right? Like these things don't happen overnight. What does it look like to make sure that they have the resilience to deal with their marginalized employees and their employees who are aspirational allies who will critique them along the journey, right? And not to take those things personally or to heart to the point where they consciously or subconsciously end up kind of curtailing effort to the point where they end up losing momentum. Like, what does it look like to build that muscle, so to speak?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, it is a long haul approach. Eric talked about a 3-year experience related to having the data and then, having the pulse across the 3 years. And you're absolutely right. You're going to be critiqued along the way because a DE&I and belonging strategy will have fits and starts. You're going to take 3 steps forward and 1 step back. And you just have to be able to keep going because you're going to hear the critique, right? And then people get personalized when they're saying, well, gosh, I'm working so hard here. And you're not seeing, me work hard and you're not complimenting enough, right? Or you're not seeing the success that we're having. You're only mentioning to us the things that aren't working. And so I think a couple things. You first of all have to keep going. You've got to know that a DE&I and belonging strategy is a messy proposition, but you would not, just stopgap on technology that might have issues. And you would not just put a stopgap on, other, smart growth opportunities that you have. So you've got to, keep going. I think that you build muscle when you understand that, one of my colleagues that's from the arts world, she suggests that you build the muscle in 3-pound weights so that if everyone sees that they are a part of, this process, and Eric talked about it, building capacity so that everyone picks up a 3-pound weight related to the D&I strategy, that everyone is doing, a part of the role. Everyone is, carrying some of the water. It doesn't seem like it's an arduous task. And I think that, partnering with, folks like Canaries that will help you pulse along the way so that you can see where you have made success, where things need to be sort of tweaked, and then things where you need to course correct. I think, here's the deal. You're going to have places where you thought, wow, this workplace experience or work function is what we really thought was gonna, take off because we're really focused in on culture. And then it sort of falls flat, right? It's about course correcting, saying, okay, this didn't work, in the way in which we thought. Let's get together and put our minds together and have some intellectual brain trust and be curious as to, number one, why it didn't work and what else might we try. So I think it's about, really having that full throttle communication across the board with sort of like the pulse surveys along the way. Building the muscle memory with the 3-pound weights because everyone has a responsibility to do this work. And then course correcting when it doesn't actually go in the ways in which, you're expecting. And then I have to also add, Zach, you got to celebrate, right? Because when you do have success, people want to be with winners, right? That comes from
100%.
Yeah, that comes from the sports world. People want to be with winners. And even if you get continuous base hits, at some point, you're going to slide into home. So
absolutely,
you got to celebrate.
No, you're absolutely right. And to your point, the last thing you said, if you're a baseball player and you get base hits every time you're at bat, you're a Hall of Famer.
That's right.
So
that's right.
so there's something to be said about that. What does it look like, Dr. Albert, in terms of not just the Neiman Marcus Group, but executive organizations? You think through 2021. You thought, and before we get to 2021, we got to talk about November. In a few short weeks, we're going to have the most consequential election of, I'll speak for myself and say my lifetime, because I don't want to be arrogant. I'm 31 years old. Y'all talking about y'all been working as long as I've been around, so I don't want to act like this is history is cyclical. Things happen. Like, I'm not trying to be whatever, but I'm gonna just speak for myself and say it's definitely one of the most consequential elections of my lifetime. What does it look like in your mind for how organizations need to pivot and shift, if at all, depending on the outcome of the election?
Yeah. So can I talk a little bit about how people are feeling through a global pandemic, a racial pandemic, and an election that I think is, in my lifetime as well, one of the most consequential ones.
Okay. Good.
I think that, people are exhausted, right? So I wrote a book on racial battle fatigue, and the fatigue that, our colleagues of color, especially, have right now, having to deal with the challenges of racism and anti-Black hatred. And we can see that woven through, all of the conversations, all of the debates, the things that people are saying as it relates to the election. It is so divisive, right? As of right now. And you could tell that it's been a very divisive along the way. So I do think that we've got to be mindful as executives that, our associates throughout the entire organization at every level, they're very fatigued. And I think that they're very worried about what the outcome is going to be. So that impacts their productivity, right? So I think that compassionate leadership, where grace and a plume and levels of assuming positive intent, for everyone in the organization, is going to be vital, necessary, and required, especially as we head into November. There is levels of exhaustion and there are levels of fear that I think that people it manifests in all sorts of ways, in the household, in civic organizations, in our places of worship, and at work. So I think that executives have to have, levels of compassionate leadership to understand just how people are feeling.
100%. I think, let me ask again, for your answer was phenomenal. So thank you, Dr. Albert. And shout out to Racial Battle Fatigue. It's, you know what, Dr. Albert, you also, that's wild humble of you that you did not, in your introduction, talk about the fact that you wrote Racial Battle Fatigue, because Racial Battle Fatigue is one of the most critical pieces of literature in this space, I'm going to say, in my lifetime. So incredible. We'll link that book in the show notes, just as a peer aside. Like, that's great. One of my mentors talks about racial battle fatigue and has shared several pieces of research that you have contributed to or that you have incited in. And so it's just funny in real time. I'm like, oh, wait, it's this Dr. Albert. That's wild. I cannot believe I'm talking to Dr. Albert on this podcast. Okay, let me follow up though, because I appreciate your answer. And Eric, feel free to chime in here. The election is happening.
Yeah.
Okay. It's so what I'm trying to understand is we got somebody who has been complicit, if not downright supportive of white supremacist tactics and groups. He's used language that is directly targeted and leveraged to wage war on Black and brown people. He's also signed an executive order that people are enforcing to not teach diversity and inclusion groups. That's creating some lines in the sand as it pertains to federal engagement and training. So my point is that I'm curious is what does it look like? And maybe I'm being overly simplistic. I'm anxious about how real these intentions and efforts are going to be if Trump gets back in the White House. And so what I'm curious to get perspective on from y'all is that a real concern? And if so, like how as leaders and DEI and belonging consultants, are you navigating it?
Well, I mean, so Zach, of course. So I want to echo, the election is going to happen, right? The election is happening in November. You're absolutely right. There's been executive orders that we are unable, some federal agencies are unable to lead efforts around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. But I would think that corporations would not follow that lead, right? I think that it's important that, executives in every industry, right? For profit, nonprofit, higher education, sport, everywhere where you actually want to have levels of higher connectivity, higher engagement, we don't have a choice. There's no choice in the matter, but to be executives with a full front focus on, enhancing DE&I because of all of this swirl in American history right now. You don't have a choice. And I think that, back to the earlier point, in these workplaces, you don't get to the levels of productivity that you want to have unless they're diverse teams that are being hired, that are being cultivated and supported, and that are being succession planned. So I would say you shouldn't follow the lead of, doing away with or disengaging in, efforts around DE&I. In fact, I think you should redouble efforts at this moment in time.
No, 100%. And I agree with you, Dr. Albert, to be clear. I think I do get anxiety about, there seems to be this deference to power, irrespective of who wields it or the manner in which they do wield it, right? And so I think I speak for not every Black person, because there's two of us here. I speak for one half, you speak for the other half. But but it's that is the idea that that the white lash is coming, right? That the retreatment is coming. I think we've already, I think we could probably look at this year and we kind of see it like an upside down V, right? Of like, things were kind of getting planned and it peaked at the murder of George Floyd, and then things have kind of started to retreat back. And I'm cautious about that. I think also we had Nicole Hannah-Jones on earlier this year, and it was literally right before the White House administration decided to, wage a war and kind of like do a white clapback. So not on the 1 and the 3, but on the 2 and the 4, just not really appreciating the history of it and looking to kind of undermine it. And so I get nervous about that. And I think I speak for a good number of folks who kind of are, if not nervous, at least probably just pessimistic about kind of the future. Now, look, I don't want to end it on that note. So Eric, look, I'm tapping you back in here. Let's talk about Neiman Marcus. Let's talk about what you're excited about. And then also, I know that you've been dropping gems. I don't want to say bombs. Context of this conversation, we've been talking about administration anyway. I don't want to. So let's talk about what you're excited about over the next 18 months. And then also, what points of insight or advice would you give to mid-level and senior level leaders looking to create or similar momentum or impact within their organizations?
Great. So Zach, could I start by maybe offering an optimistic perspective to the question of the post-election? And it would be this, that despite the pain and anguish and trauma that's been inflicted on the country in the last several years, what I would offer is that in some ways, this administration has given us a gift in that it has unwittingly unmasked the white supremacy that's been denied for many years, that infuses all aspects of the culture. And the genie can't be put back in the bottle. And what I would say is that the gift in that is that you can solve and fix what's visible. And the role that employers like Neiman Marcus can play, regardless of the election outcome, is to be the antidote to all of this, because at the end of the day, organizations have incredible power in our culture, and they have the power to make change happen. And I'll just relate a quick story from about 20 years ago when I was a director of employee relations at Gap, which is like a equal employment opportunity officer. So my job was to oversee investigations of discrimination, harassment, et cetera. And I remember one call that I had with an associate, a sales associate in somewhere in rural South Texas. And the upshot of it was that he had been like severely abused because of his sexual orientation, sexual identity in his community, and was being harassed by a customer actually in the store. And just one of the things that stuck with me as he related it to me was that his store manager created the only sanctuary in his life. This is a 17-year-old kid in his life in this small town that he had known. She coached him, she counseled him when he was feeling suicidal, and she created like a parent role for him. And I thought, okay, that illustrates the power of anyone. And you asked about a mid-level manager, anyone, anywhere, to be able to create change in the life of someone else. And so to me, what we hope to do at Neiman Marcus Group is to be able to leverage the power and zeitgeist of this moment to be able to turbocharge our efforts to make our company, our workplace, our shopping environment one of true belonging, one that stands out, one that's a model. It was one of the things that was very important about the same work that we did at Gap, was that we recognized that as a majority female employer that had female leadership from top to bottom and had proven pay equity and equal employment opportunity for women, that we had an opportunity to not only do the right thing and be that kind of employer where there was no glass ceiling for women, but to actually go out and advocate and be a role model for change and use the power that we had as a Fortune 200 corporation with huge brand equity to make change happen. So for example, we went out every year and championed pay equality, and on Pay Equality Day went out and used our leaders to go out and advocate. And we one year had all of our associates on Equal Pay Day wear t-shirts that said, "Every day is Equal Pay Day at Gap Bank, ask me about it." And they were all prepared to talk about our published research on how you can achieve pay equity. So I think that's incredible. That's what I strive to do here in Neiman Marcus, is figure out how we do the same thing across multiple dimensions of diversity. And that's just part of being a good corporate citizen and a good citizen of a democracy in general.
You know what? That's the type of note we're going to end this whole episode on. That was great. Shout out to Eric, shout out to Dr. Albert and Neiman Marcus and Third Eye and Canaries for the work that they're doing. Y'all, this has been a really cool conversation. I hope that y'all check it out. Make sure you look at the show notes, okay? There's a bunch of stuff in there to learn more about what Neiman Marcus is doing, learn more about Third Eye, and learn more about Canaries. Until next time, this has been Zach. You know what we're doing every single week. We're having conversations that center and amplify Black and brown people at work. Don't be afraid if you see a white person on the podcast episode, y'all. We have white folks. We have aspirational allies on here too. It's okay. It's normal. Okay. We need them. What Eric said earlier, you got to have the people who have the power. Look, we don't have power as a people, right? We got to coordinate and create power with those who have a little bit of it, and we can build it together. Okay. That's just how this thing works. We got to practice group economics, and we also got to partner with other people. That's another conversation for another time. Point is, check it out. Don't be afraid. Okay. I can't even keep this up. It makes me laugh, but I want to make sure y'all actually understand we do have aspirational allies. I'm going to say shout out to Dr. Albert again, because Dr. Albert, y'all really need to check out her work. Like, it's incredible. Like she said, 30 years in the game one time, and I'm going to say it again, 30 years in the game. Like she really knows what she's talking about. She's not out here just writing spicy LinkedIn posts and getting a bunch of likes. She actually does the work in real life. You know what I mean? What else? Till next time, we're all on all the social medias. I'm not about to say all these domains. We own all these things. Got the SEO popping like that. Just type in Living Corporate all over Beyonce's internet. Just type in Living Corporate. All right. Till next time, y'all. This is my third time saying it, but I'm gonna say it again. Till next time, y'all. This has been Zach. You've been listening to Eric. Severson, EVP and Chief People Officer at Neiman Marcus Group, and Dr. Albert, Executive Vice President of Culture, Innovation, and Inclusion at S2A Solutions. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.